everybody. Kara Oosterhouse here with RealAgriculture.com. I am here. It is Monday. I don't know about you guys. I am in southern Alberta. The wind has been blowing. I mean, I guess that's what we get for going from minus 30 to plus 10 in the span of like 4 days. But finally, it has calmed down, and I am just feeling like it is going to be a wonderful Monday afternoon. And I'm sure our guest is feeling the same way, as he is based in Calgary, Alberta. So I'm going to bring him in here today. I have Jeremy Boychyn, who is an agronomy research extension specialist with Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions. How is it going today?
It's going good, Kara. Yeah, I did notice a bit of wind yesterday. I think in Calgary it was only about 50 clicks though, and then I read that you guys were somewhere around 100 at some points.
Yeah, we were gusting 80 to 100, and it was nasty. We had full, I mean, like, we're in a pretty dry area here in the Palliser Triangle, and we had some serious soil erosion going on yesterday. So little frightening for maybe February. Could use maybe a little bit of moisture on top of that, but other than that, it is now calm. So but just crossing my fingers, maybe we can just have a good afternoon.
Yeah, and hopefully no one has to run down and chase their bins.
Yeah, that too. I was touring around last night. Didn't look like there was a lot of pivots or anything or bins that were blown over. So that's always good. I know we had, what was that, a month or two ago that we had all those problems. So let's just keep the wind down a little bit. That would be cool.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the time of the year. It is already end of February. I cannot believe next week we're getting into March. So we're starting to look at agronomic things we want to keep in mind. We're especially, like you said, we're coming into seeding comes a lot quicker than we think. You know, you can sit here and be like, oh well, it's still only February, but before we know it, we'll be seeding. So what are some of the top things producers need to keep it in their minds right now as we're headed into that time of the year?
Yeah, I think, there's a number of things that seem to come on a lot faster than we anticipate them to. January kind of feels like a relaxed time, and then February starts to roll in, and we're going, oh man, some decisions need to be made, and start to send in seed tests and really hammer down what that crop rotation is if we haven't done that already. Get an idea of what our exact fertility rates are going to be. If we haven't selected those last few varieties that we're looking at, make a selection on those on the cereal side. I know there's still some decisions maybe that are happening between malt and feed barley, because some of those prices were looking interesting this year. So, there's a lot of things that I think, it always helps to have these discussions as we head towards that spring season of, what I really need to be thinking about as we're hitting the ground, and what do I need to do to get this crop off to a really good start. And, I love these discussions because all of the things that we do in crop throughout the rest of the year, whether it be a herbicide application, a fungicide application, an in-crop nitrogen application, or harvest, all of these things pivot around the idea of establishing a good, strong, healthy, even crop. And the better we can do to establish an even, strong, and healthy crop, the more impactful each of those decisions are going to be when we're in the season. So if we're better able to time a herbicide application across the entire field because our field is more even, we're going to get more efficacy and efficiency out of that application. Same with the fungicide timing, whether it be at head timing or at flag leaf. So we're getting more impact, more bang for our buck out of this. So, I can never put enough weight on the importance of making sure that you're getting that crop in the ground and started well in the spring.
But before you're even putting it into the ground, one of the things is seed testing and as well variety selection. So do you want to talk a bit about what's, when it comes to, before even getting that seed in the ground, what are some things we can do to make sure it's off to a good start?
Yeah, there isn't a producer that I talk to that I don't encourage to do seed tests. To me, it's like going to the bank and figuring out what you have to work with before going to make a purchase. What is my germination? What is my vigor? What's my 1,000 kernel weight? Am I dealing with any diseases on this seed that I'm going to have to, either make a decision on, do I want to use this seed lot, or am I going to have to treat this seed lot with a specific seed treatment. So we're able to use that information to then make the most out of our seed. If we're dealing with a couple of different seed lots and we have one seed lot that's looking like a lower germination, should we be managing that in a different way? Should we be increasing our seeding rate for that to make up for it? Or is there a different seed option that we can utilize and implement? Fungal screens, there can be a lot of information that comes from those that can help make a decision. One thing that's big on the Alberta side this year is Fusarium and Fusarium graminearum. I actually just got a phone call from a producer who works in an area, grows in an area, who has never seen downgrading from Fusarium, who's never had any Fusarium show up on their seed tests, and they were looking at a seed option, and it came back as having 0.5% Fusarium graminearum. He's going, should I bring this into my region? Is this something I should be doing? Is this a low enough number? And if you're not seeing any Fusarium in your area for any past history, you haven't seen any downgrading or any infection, this is the kind of information that can help you make a better decision, not just for this year, but for your crops down the road, because you're not just making a decision on that crop that's going in this year when it comes to Fusarium, but multiple crops down the road that we can potentially mitigate having risk of Fusarium head blight on. And then we look at other diseases that can come up on your seed test: Cochleobus sativus, Pyronophora, Paragnospora. These are diseases that, when we get into the 10-15% range, can actually impact the amount of germination that we're seeing out of that crop. So when we get that seed test back and we see, okay, we have a drop in germination, we can run through that seed test and ask the question of what is causing the impact of the drop in germination. And will a seed treatment mitigate the risk of that or reduce the impact on germination? And this is a question that you can actually ask your seed testing lab as well. So if you get results back and you're not too sure, will a seed treatment help this? They can actually do comparisons between treated and non-treated seed. So then you can really get an idea, okay, once I put the seed in the ground with a seed treatment on, this is what my actual germination is going to be like. So it can really help you make stronger decisions on the seed that you're using and how it's going to impact your crop through the year. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of really getting an idea of what that seed quality is. And again, it comes back to the idea of it really does impact your decisions in season, and it impacts the amount of value you get from those in-crop decisions, those in-crop applications.
Absolutely. And when it comes to, you were still talking before you even get it in the ground. Lots of producers have probably chosen their varieties already, but there's still probably a fair amount that have not. Do you want to talk a bit about early versus late maturing varieties when you're making that decision?
Yeah, this is a conversation that's been coming up more and more often, and more producers, when I'm having conversations, they're entertaining the idea of maybe going with a shorter season variety. And I think this is conducive of, the past 3-4 years in the northern part of Alberta, having issues around harvest and having crop left out over winter, which is no fun for anyone. It's impacting quality, it's impacting profitability. It just leaves a lot of risk and money out in the field, and that's not what we want to be dealing with. So the question then comes, is there a way I can reduce my risk here? And not only that, sometimes the question and the conversation comes from, I'm having trouble maybe getting protein with my CWRS, and maybe they're looking at varieties that in their region, they're a little bit longer. So a lot of the nitrogen ends up going to yield and then doesn't have the time to go to protein. So they don't end up getting the quality that they're looking for the profitability. So I think with both of these options, looking at a shorter season variety could potentially provide some value there, because when you When you bring in a shorter season variety, obviously you're gaining the ability to get that crop off a little bit earlier before you start seeing some of that adverse weather that comes in the fall, and hopefully still able to gain that higher quality out of that CWRS. So this is a conversation that's going on a little bit more often, and I think it's an important question to ask on your farm. Is this an option? Even if it's just a couple sections or a couple quarter sections this year, is it something that could be a viable option to mitigate risk, to diversify the grain that I have in the bin, and to be able to better market my farm to create more profitability? So I think it's rather interesting. There's a lot of conversation around new varieties, because there's a lot of new varieties that have come to market in the past couple of years. And it really comes down to me when I have a conversation about selecting a variety, it's knowing what's impacting your profitability and your capacity to pull value from that crop. If FHB is your serious issue, then apart from looking for a high yield variety, then you need to be targeting something that has good FHB resistance. If lodging is your issue and you're also dealing with FHB, then looking for a variety that fits all those needs. This year we're looking at a lot of wheat midge issues that are coming into central Alberta. So the conversation around, can I still fit my yield goals while mitigating the risk that comes from wheat midge by using a tolerant or resistant variety to that? So really, a lot of these conversations and a lot of these ideas will come from bringing your grain to the elevator at the end of the year. What are you getting downgraded for? And then you can start asking the questions, is there varieties that can resolve some of these issues in following years?
And Lindsay, on that note, is asking a question. She says, are cereal growers slower to adopt new varieties? If yes, why? What's your take on this?
I don't think that that's an interesting question, because my immediate comparison would be, compared to corn or soybean or corn or canola, where, there's a lot of new varieties coming out every couple of years. The genetics move pretty quick. So it doesn't take long before you're almost feeling like you're behind. And then in some cases, the companies are saying, we're not going to be producing this variety anymore, this cultivar anymore. So time to jump out. But I think, the process that we have in place for the development of the varieties that we have, we produce very strong varieties that find niches in Western Canada. I mean, you look at a variety like Brandon, which, for a number of years has been a very strong staple. And I think, I don't think that producers are against adopting new varieties or slow to adopt new varieties. I think they're cautious with their move, because they're making large acre decisions on these, and they still are making the comparisons. But when they find a variety that fits and fills those needs, just like I mentioned before, of here are the needs that they consistently see year by year, selecting that variety and keeping that variety and knowing that it'll consistently perform for you, I think weighs a little bit more on the cereal side. But I do think that doesn't mean that those producers aren't keeping their eyes open to new varieties that are coming down the pipeline.
So we've talked about some of the things before you're even putting your seed in the ground. Now, once that seed's in the ground, what's kind of the producer's next step to getting that even emergence? What sorts of things can they be doing?
Well, they could do a dance for rain. I think would be a wonderful thing that most producers would love to do, to get a nice even emergence of the crop out of the ground. But I think once we start to see emergence, it's a good idea, to get out there and do your plant stand counts. And this is something that I say over and over again every year. And I think it rings true every year, because we make these decisions on these seed lots, and we make a decision on how much seed we want to hit the ground based on what our plant stand is going to be. And then in some cases it hits the ground, and then we walk away and we just accept what's there. And I think we're missing a large opportunity to even fine tune our seeding rates and our practices a little bit more. If you're working with a CWRS and you want that target plant stand to be at about 300 plants per meter squared or 30 plants per foot squared, and you seed for that based on your 1,000 kernel weight, based on your germination, and if you're putting a seed treatment on there, and you're going, okay, that was my estimated germination, I expect that to work, and walk away, and then you look at it and you think, it's probably close, but then you go and take a look and you count, and you're actually at 25 plants per square foot or 250 plants per meter squared. Where's that loss coming from? Why? You did the calculations. You know that you were going to have this much germination based on your seed quality. So why am I lacking that emergence? Why isn't that showing up? And you're never going to know that there's that gap between what you think is going on and what's actually going on until you get out in the field and take a count. Do your plant stand counts and get an idea of what's actually emerging. And, the research shows the variation in the amount of emergence that can actually occur. If you look at Brian Barris's research, he's done a ton of research looking at, this is how much seed we put on the ground, and this is how much is actually emerging. And this is based on germination, 1,000 kernel weight, vigor, and getting an estimated of germination. And they're still, in some cases where they're seeding 400 seeds per meter squared, they're getting emergence rates of 60%, sometimes as low as 45%. And this is just based on environmental conditions for where they're growing. It's based on management practices. Each management practice on a different farm is going to impact your germination a little bit differently. Whether you're using this type of drill or that type of seeder, it's going to affect how much emergence is going to happen. Where's your moisture level at? Are you typically seeing these types of moisture levels in your field? So if you year after year go out, take a look, do your plant stand counts, and get an idea of what your actual emergence is, then when you're doing your seeding rate plans for upcoming years, you can say, I know in this field or I know in this area that this is what my actual emergence actually is. Instead of, the germination rate that you get from your seed test is important, but it's used in conjunction of what actually happens in your fields. So aligning those two together can help you be even more accurate with what your plant stand count is going to be, and help you get a better idea of your risks.
And that was going to be my next question was, how important is it when it comes to record keeping? Like, do you think a lot of producers, like, not to talk down of any producers, but I know myself, even you go out scouting sometimes and you go, okay, yeah, and you look at what's going on, but you don't necessarily use that information. You don't write it down. Do you want to talk a bit about the importance of why you should be keeping those records year to year to year?
Yeah, it's, even I catch myself doing this. This has been a year of Zoom meetings and webinars where you're taking notes or you're listening. And then, what I like to do is go back and reiterate those notes and get an idea and kind of fine tune them. And, sometimes when you've had 3-hour meetings in a row, you just want to walk away and not even look at anything. And I think, there's a lot of this decision fatigue that comes in during seeding season. You've been making decisions since January, February on what you're going to do and how it's going to get in the ground and where it's going to go and how much of this and how much of that. And, the stress of breakdowns during seeding season. And, by the time it's all done, you just kind of want to walk away and put your hands up, right? Which it's understandable. It's a lot of effort and it's a lot of time, and that decision fatigue sets in. But, I think the idea of keeping these numbers and going in after the fact, it's 21 days after seeding, go in and get an idea of your cereal emergence. And when you collect those numbers, you can really start to paint a strong idea of what is actually going on the farm. It's taking that theoretical concept and those plans and really getting a practical application of what's going on. Last year we talked about the plot to farm projects we have going on in Alberta. And one of the producers I worked with was comparing to two varieties that he was trying to get an idea of whether he was going to move to a new variety. And he had his seed tests, and he said, Jeremy, based on these seed test numbers, this is the seeding rate I'm going to go at. Based on what I've seen on my fields, I'm expecting 8% of this not to emerge. And I asked them the question. I said, a lot of the research we've seen, 8% would be a high emergence based on what we've seen from some small plot research. Does that still make sense to you? I've seen it. I know my numbers. I asked him, made sure he was confident with it. And then when we went back and did the plant stand counts, because we had to seed each variety at different rates to get as close to as we can to 30 plants per square foot. He was bang on. And that comes from knowing, based on his environmental conditions, based on moisture, based on the equipment that he uses and the residue that's on there, he had a strong idea of what his emergence was going to be. And I'll tell you, it wasn't exactly what was on the paperwork based on the seed test. It was based on the paperwork and what he knew his fields were going to produce. So when you start to do that year after year, you can get a much more confident decision once you get into, what seeding rate am I going to go with this? And then that helps build on to future decisions and just allows you to be more confident moving forward.
So we got some weed geeks in here asking some questions. Brianne is saying, Jeremy, you better mention scouting and weeds because she's listening. And as we know, Brianne is a fantastic weed scientist. And but the question here is actually from Lara. She says, what would be the thresholds for a reseed? So say it's, a bad year and it's just not doing great. What sort of thresholds are we looking at?
That's a great question. And I don't remember the exact numbers. You're going to have to probably be, decently below 15 plants per square foot, I think, before you're going to have to rethink the reseed. And I'd have to double check my numbers to make sure. So don't take this to the wall, but it's not just about what your expected yield is going to be. It's about, what's going to be the cost of reseeding this? Am I going to have to spray some of it out? So it's generally pretty significant of a drop that you have to see before you have to reseed. And I think somewhere in that 10 to 15 plants per square foot range, I think is where you start to really ask that question. You can still get reasonably good yields on that 20 plants per square foot, but you're really not maximizing the potential of your fields if you're in that range.
Yeah, and when we're looking at weeds, like Brianne would like to, what have you been talking to any scientists or any researchers around? What's the outlook? What if we have a dry year this year again? Are we looking at any sort of herbicide carryover?
There's always the risk of herbicide carryover when you don't get that moisture, and maybe you have less organic matter in certain areas and you have that carryover. I think there's a risk. I was just looking at specifically in Alberta, we're in a 90-day dry period right now. We had a decent amount of moisture in the fall. I haven't gone through to check whether we've seen enough rainfall across the province to get an idea whether there's going to be herbicide carryover risk. But, if you're in one of those areas that hasn't seen a lot of moisture, I think it's a good question to ask your chemical reps. But yeah, it's always a question I think that's important in Western Canada where we see challenges with rainfall. And, one thing that I'll hit on while we're talking about weeds, and I'm sure Brianne will be happy about it, is, we're seeing increased occurrences of resistant wild oats popping up across Alberta, across the provinces. And this is a significant issue that, it's only going to increase the cost to producers if we allow it to continue to push, or if we don't monitor for it. So one of the important things that producers should be thinking about this spring after herbicide timing is really taking a walk through and seeing, whether they're seeing patches of wild oats that escaped. And this is going to be your first inclination of maybe I have issues, or maybe I have a risk on my hands. I was talking to an agronomist who's maybe about an hour north of Calgary, just west of Highway 2. And, there's a lot of producers he deals with that this past year sent in a lot of the seeds of wild oats that made it past herbicide applications, and they're seeing a lot of resistance that they hadn't seen before, or they didn't notice. And some of this could be historical overuse of group ones or group twos that, finally it's coming back to be an issue. So monitoring for these things is, while you're out there doing your monitoring for, whether you want to start to align a fungicide application or seeing how your crop looks, just look at those weeds and get an idea. Is there areas that are higher risk, where you're seeing a more dense population of wild oats that you may see those issues, or maybe even areas where your spray application maybe only gets part of a full application because you're spinning around that corner quickly over multiple years, and that kind of half dose starts to add up. So it's an important thing to monitor, because once it does begin to create an issue where you're seeing group 1 or group 2 or group 1 and 2 resistant wild oats, it then becomes an every year cost for those producers. So catching it before it becomes a larger issue is saving yourself a ton of money in the future. And there's a variety of different places you can send in seed samples. The important thing is if you think you have resistance, don't destroy them right away. Keep them, flag them, monitor them to the end of the year, collect those samples. Dr. Charles Geddes at the AAFC Lethbridge Research Station, last I heard, was collecting resistant wild oat seeds to test for group 1 and 2. So you can reach out to him and they'll send you information to send that in. But you do need a decent amount of seed to send in. So not killing those, but flagging them and monitoring them is the correct move.
Yeah, absolutely. And is this just a spraying conversation, or is it rotation too? Is there other factors that kind of play into this resistance we might be seeing?
Oh, it's everything. It's the way we produce our crop is the environment that we're setting for these weeds. How often you till, how often you spray, what you spray with, what crops you use, how often you use those crops, what rotation you use those crops. All of these things are going to impact how these weeds are being impacted by the environment that you're setting. And in any situation, if you're using the same practice over and over again, whether it be the same herbicides, the same crop over and over again, not layering your herbicides, you're creating a consistent pressure that then those weeds can escape or create resistance from. So when we think about weed control and we think about weed resistance management, it's not just about a question of herbicide. It's a question about, how am I managing this cropping system? Am I managing this cropping system in a way that is going to create ease for these weeds to overcome a consistent pressure that I'm never changing? Because if you're using the same herbicide group year in and year out, or we're in a situation where it's wheat canola, and we're using the same herbicides in that wheat every year, you're creating that potential, creating that risk. So it is about rotating the crops. It is about rotating your herbicides. It is about layering your herbicides. Try and be as unpredictable as possible is the goal. And there's going to be no complete solution for herbicide resistance. Every time I think about herbicide resistance, I think about Jurassic Park when he says, life will find a way. And that's exactly it. Any pressure we create, these weeds are going to find a way to survive within them. So we need to keep creating scenarios where the weeds are guessing.
That is, you have me speechless. That was one of the best references I've heard all day. So thank you for that. Next guest, if you're watching, top that. But Brianne's just reminding us here. She says Charles. So you were referencing Charles Geddes at AAFC Lethbridge. She says Charles only tests unique resistance, not Group 1 and 2. But Provincial
Mm.
Labs and Resistant Wild Oat Action Committee has an infographic on where to send wild oat samples. So check that out if you're interested in sending your wild oat samples. They'll be happy to have them, I'm sure.
Yeah, if you
And
search Resistant Wild Oat Action Committee on Google, it'll be one of the first things that pop up there. And there's, there's not just that, but there's a bunch of other information about managing resistant wild oats. So it'll be a great resource for producers moving forward.
And just one last quick comment before, or question before we sign off today. Is there any sort of diseases producers should have their eyes open for? I've heard rumblings of stripe rust could be an issue this year. Do you want to touch on some of the things you're seeing, or that you're expecting to see?
Sure. Yeah. So definitely stripe rust is on the kind of watch list this year. And that is because, thanks to the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network, which is really driven by Dr. Kelly Turkington out of AAFC Lacombe. Out of the Pacific Northwest, they're seeing higher levels of stripe rust in their wheat populations. So when we deal with stripe rust, typically it comes from wind dispersal. So winds that will come from the Pacific Northwest and then deposit the spores from stripe rust in southern and central parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan. So when we start to see increased risks in the Pacific Northwest, that means increased risks for Alberta. That's not the only place that we see stripe rust come from. It's also out of Kansas and Texas. With this cold weather, I'm not sure whether Texas is going to continue to be an issue. I think that's it's an interesting question. But out of the Pacific Northwest, as of the most recent update, it looks like it's going to be a risk. So it's something for producers to be keeping an eye out for. And the recommending spray for that is prior to 5% flag leaf infection. After that, it starts to become much more of a challenge to control. If you're using a resistant variety to stripe rust, there's a little bit less value on a spray application, depending on the race. But if you're using a non-resistant variety, it doesn't take much to get the payback on that. Some other things to keep an eye out for. Bacterial blight is one that has been growing more recently. This is something that looks very similar to a lot of fungal diseases that we get, fungal leaf diseases on wheat. It kind of starts at the apex of the wheat leaf, where the dew hangs out the most. And it's a bacterial disease, so it's not impacted by a fungicide application. So what happens is this bacterial infection starts in the seed. So it starts from an infected seed. You seed that crop, and then the crop grows. You start to see it maybe at the 5 to 6 leaf stage sometimes, but it really starts to advance when you get into the flag leaf timing. And it starts as little water-soaked kind of lesions, and then it grows and it can take over the entire leaf, and it looks like a very dead, dried leaf as everything kind of all those lesions grow together. And then what happens is the grain that is produced from that infected plant is then itself infected with bacterial blight. So if you take that seed and seed it into a new crop, you're then seeding a new crop that's already infected with bacterial blight. So understanding what these symptoms look like, scouting for them, knowing whether that crop is at risk, is going to be important, because it's going to help you make decisions on whether to use that grain for seed or not use that grain for seed in following years. And I'll repeat the idea that this isn't something that can be remedied with a fungicide. So proper ID is important, because this bacterial infection thrives in moist conditions. So when you spray water that has fungicide on it on something that isn't impacted by fungicides, but you're just increasing the amount of moisture and moving your equipment through and taking bacterial from one plant and moving it to another, you're increasing the impact increasing the risk of you having issues later on down the road in future crops. So, the Alberta wheat, Alberta barley, Sask barley, Sask wheat, and Manitoba Crop Alliance developed a fact sheet that you can find if you search any of their websites on bacterial leaf streak. You will find information on how to monitor for it.
Okay, sounds good. Be sure to check those out, anyone listening, because I'm sure they're very valuable pieces of information. And like you said, it's sometimes important to really have that background knowledge before you just go out there with a fungicide. So, and on a lighter note, Jeremy, I think Lara and Lindsay are creating a T-shirt for you right now. Lindsay says it's going to say it's not one thing, it's everything. And Lara's debating that it's going to be your head with Jeff Goldblum's body as a graphic on the shirt. So
If
we
I'm
can
if I'm
go.
thinking correctly about what body and scene that is, I don't know how public appropriate it is, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lara brings up a good point. Check out the Weed School I recently did with Jeremy. We talked about seed testing. So if you want to get more into depth on seed testing than what we did today, go check it out at www.weedschool.com. And thank you very much for joining us today, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me, Kara. Always a great time.
Yes, absolutely. And every time I see you, there's less face to be seen. So looking forward to it.
Brian Barris made fun of me last time I chatted with him. He said I didn't have time to trim my beard, but I trim it. I just not as aggressively more recently.
Yeah. Oh, it's all good. And thank you for everyone. I always appreciate all your comments, your questions. It's great to have you guys along and be able to just talk to you. So thank you very much. And we will be back tomorrow with RealAg Live. I always get myself here. I'm not sure who is the guest tomorrow, but we'll be social. It'll be up on our social media later this afternoon. Who will be our guest? So be sure to check that out. And we are Monday to Friday. We just love having you guys along. So tune in, and we'll be here. So thank you very much, and thanks for getting real and getting connected.